Cuba, Cuba, Cuba. Cuba is in the middle of a full-blown humanitarian and infrastructure crisis. People are dealing with blackouts, no water, food shortages, medicine shortages, and a transportation system that barely works. And that's just not random. When the fuel supply collapses, everything else starts falling apart too. And recently, you had a bunch of social media influencers charter a plane to head out to Cuba to deliver humanitarian aid. Let's talk about it. Before we get too deep into what's going on, let me welcome everybody back to the channel. If you've come across this video and are not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button. I'd be happy to have you. First, I want to give you a little bit of history of Cuba and how they have gotten to this point.
Being lied to about Cuba. For over 60 years, the United States has had an embargo on the country. And for a good portion of that time period, Cuba really didn't have to worry about it because it had an ally, and that ally was the Soviet Union. They provided Cuba with oil, trade, opportunity. Thousands of Cubans went to the USSR for education. They became doctors, engineers, and they brought those skills back to Cuba. Then in 1991...
Repeating once again our top story, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev has been removed from power, and there are tanks now in the streets of Moscow.
The Soviet Union falls. And suddenly, Cuba is alone. No support, still under embargo. It entered into a time in Cuba called the Special Period. Food shortages, fuel shortages, and massive blackouts. Cuban families survived mostly on remittances that were sent from their family members abroad. International businesses were still working in Cuba. Canadian companies, European companies were doing infrastructure work, mining, and humanitarian aid. Now, that was until 1996, when the U.S. decided to tighten the pressure. They passed the Helms-Burton Act. The man behind it was Jesse Helms, an avid racist and someone who was staunchly against the civil rights movement. It allowed Americans to sue foreign investors in U.S. courts for using American properties that were seized by the Cuban government during the revolution. Companies immediately started pulling out of Cuba. They didn't want to get dragged into U.S. courts. Investments dried up. The island is squeezed even more. So now you have a situation today, and we have a country cut off for at least the last 3 decades, abandoned by their biggest ally that no longer exists, still under pressure from the most powerful nation on the planet. Fast forward to today. It's easy to look at Cuba and say it's communism. And this is not to absolve the Cuban government from its responsibility to its people, but it's a lot more complex than the political ideologies that we like versus the ones that we don't.
Now that we have been educated on a little bit of the history of Cuba and how we got here, I want us to understand that the United States is a major part of the story currently with Cuba. Washington has been applying heavy pressure on Cuba by restricting fuel access and tightening the conditions around who can supply the island. The goal is to squeeze the Cuban government politically and economically, but the people on the ground are the ones who are truly suffering and paying the price. I've done just a minimal amount of research, so I'm no expert in all of what's going on between the United States and Cuba, but from the research that I have done, I gather that the United States is trying to force Cuba's government to make political and economic concessions, not just fix the blackout problems, the electricity problems. The clearly stated goal is to weaken the Cuban regime and to push for democratic change. And they also want Cuba to open up its economy to those outside, specifically the United States. And what's going on in Cuba is a crisis that is multi-layered, and the crisis is deepening. It's not just one problem. It's a collapse of several different systems at one time. people are dealing with the blackouts. There's no water. There's food shortages. There's medicine shortages, and a transportation network that really doesn't work. One part of the system fails, everything else fails too. So the biggest immediate issue is fuel. Cuba depends heavily on imported oil to generate electricity, to run their water pumps, to move food, and keep their hospitals functioning. When fuel runs short, the power grid becomes unstable, and that leads to the massive blackouts. And when the electricity goes out, so does the water service, refrigeration, and the ability to distribute essentials across the country. And from my understanding, this is where the United States comes into play. They are a major part of the problem of this story. The current United States pressure campaign is aimed at squeezing Cuba's government by limiting access to oil, restricting trade, and increasing costs for any country that tries to help supply Cuba in any way, shape, or form. In plain English, Washington is trying to make it harder for Cuba to function until the government changes course politically and economically up to the United States' standard, as if they are some huge moral authority. And then enter social media influencers like Hasan, Piker, Amani B, Cold Pink. You have these activist influencers taking trips to Cuba, people who show up claiming they're there to help the people, but come off looking disconnected from the reality of what's going on in Cuba and what the Cubans are living through. If you're truly there for solidarity, you don't stay in insulated luxury. You don't turn it into content opportunities, and you don't act like a crisis is a backdrop to your personal brand. Have y'all seen what's been going on with Cold Pink and this flight that they chartered full of social media activists? Here, I got a couple of videos. Let's watch them, shall we?
We're on the plane now getting ready to go to Havana, Cuba. We have this entire charter flight full of people and, as important, full of medicines. And we're so excited to be with the Cuban people and show our support, show our solidarity, and to say that this cruel, inhumane, barbaric policy of the Trump administration has to go.
They chartered a private plane, allegedly, dripped, blinged out in their wealth. They are dragging Hasan Piker over on Twitter, dissecting the $1,200 or $1,600 glasses that he's wearing, the $600 t-shirt that he's wearing, the Rolex watch that one of the other people are wearing. They all are going over, dripped in luxury, to hand deliver aid to the Cuban people. Now, I'm not saying that the Cuban people don't need the aid that was delivered. I'm saying that the people who were delivering the aid are out of touch and are uneducated on the history of what is going on in Cuba and how it has gotten to this point. But they are so excited to be heading over to Cuba. They are cheering themselves on.
Here we are on our way to Cuba! And we're here to say, Cuba sí bloqueo no! 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 Cuba sí bloqueo no!
So they get over in Cuba, they have all of these supplies that they deliver. They meet with some people. I'm getting all of this from out there in the political streets over there on Twitter. They meet with some people. And yeah, while they're there, they're staying in a 5-star luxury hotel. One of the only places in Cuba that has electricity.
So this is Cuba, and there is no electricity anywhere because there's no oil, there's no energy. And this is what it looks like. Except that hotel, because it's a 5-star hotel. That's it. Everybody else is in the dark.
Now what they're saying is that that hotel is one of the only hotels that the government will allow Americans to stay in while they are in Cuba. But the Cuban people say differently. The Cuban people are pissed about this whole situation. This is the issue with these leftists like Cold Pink and Hasan Piker, and they don't speak to the people. They believe they know what's best when they don't. I've been coming across so many videos of Cubans who are pissed off about this situation. Let's watch a few, shall we?
This streamer, Hasan Piker, who has millions of followers, went to Cuba and justified why he was staying in a 5-star hotel. Only problem is he's completely either so fucking stupid he doesn't even know anything about Cuba, or he's deliberately lying to his viewers. And I'm going to prove it. Watch this.
Tourism is the lifeline for the Cuban economy as it stands currently. The government has very limited resources, and the American government makes it illegal for Americans to stay wherever they want when they're in Cuba. They have to stay in what they've declared as 5-star hotels.
It's actually the opposite, Hasan. This is the U.S. government's prohibited accommodations list while you're in Cuba. This list is all of the major hotels because the U.S. government doesn't want Americans supporting the regime. They want you to stay in local places to support the local Cuban people. Look what's on here. Iberostar Selection, Havana, Torreca, Iberostar Parque Central, and likely where he's staying, Gran Hotel Manzana Kempinski. See, because all of these hotels, 51% of the ownership is the Cuban government. So when you stay here, you're supporting the Cuban government. Hasan, you're either lying to your followers, most likely you don't know anything about Cuba. What I would do to debate Hasan Piker given this topic,
when people go to visit Cuba, they are encouraged to stay at Airbnbs because that supports the locals. But you see, Hasan Piker thinks he knows everything. He knows everything and knows absolutely nothing. There's more.
You guys, I want to say something to the people. I want to speak on the people that went to Cuba this past weekend. I had never heard of Cold Pink before until just recently. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, they're communists, they're socialists, ¿sabes qué? They're a bunch of descarados, okay? Because in my delusional mind, in my head, I was like, oh, okay, all these people are going to go to Cuba and they're going to have so much food and they're going to take so much medicine. And then my Cuban people is going to line up and they're going to have boxes set up for them. There's going to be in these boxes beans and rice and medicine, diapers. Tú sabes, I thought that was going to happen. I don't even know why they thought that was going to happen, right? But what happened? It was the complete opposite. Qué descarado. They showed up at the airport clapping and then they go partying it up. Look at this. Well,
Wow.
the Cuban people in Cuba was without electricity. Who do you think provided electricity for them to party it up? And what's even worse, you guys, at the end of the night, these people were able to go back to the hotel that had electricity. Everything was in darkness. They were able to go back to their air conditioning, eat food, and have cold water and all that. Cuba people went to sleep without food, without nothing. Que descarado. And then this, we're going to paint a mural. You know what's going to happen when the Cuban people walk through that mural? This is exactly, mira esto, come mierda. That's exactly what it's happening, okay? We didn't see any of them handing out. You know what? It was all propaganda. It was all a show that the government was involved. How sad. How sad. You guys changed nothing. Made it even worse. I'm going to play an audio for you guys because I said, Sobrino, what did these people pass out? I want you guys to hear what he said.
De frío para los mayores. Un paquete de galletitas, eso, María es. Y para los viejos creo que, no sé si le dieron un paquete de leche. No sé. Ah, no, a los viejos no le dieron nada, ni me recuerdo. Frijoles también para los viejos. O sea, te estoy hablando de que no sé dónde están las cosas.
Little Mexican things. Where was the medicine? Where all those food and medicine that you brought? Where do you think it's going? Que descarado, how sad. You changed nothing because you didn't talk to any of the Cuban people. They didn't take you to the Ria. It's so sad. Y que descarado, and shame on them. And I said what I said.
They think they know better than the Cuban people. They didn't even respect the Cuban people enough to talk to the Cuban people. Hasan Piker has a platform big enough to say, hey, we're thinking about doing a humanitarian aid trip to Cuba. Anybody has ties to the island? I got some questions. Didn't take one moment to get educated, to talk to the actual people over in Cuba or who has close ties to Cuba.
So we're on the plane now, getting ready to go to Havana, Cuba. We have this entire charter flight full of people and, as important, full of medicines. And we're so...
Oh, I see we meet again, Code Pink. Because in 2024, I actually confronted that woman outside of Capitol Hill.
To do with the embargo.
You want to get
Nothing to do with the embargo, that people are in jail because I'm doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that woman has been doing this for years. At this point, she's a professional protester. And she, ironically, can make money doing the very thing that gets Cubans in jail. Because not once in her activism I have ever heard her talk about the Cuban dictatorship at all. Because at the end of the day, she doesn't care about the Cuban people. She cares about upholding an ideology. An ideology that lets her get on that plane comfortably in a first-class ticket, by the way, lets her pass through customs, accepts her entrance. Meanwhile, there are actual Cubans who are exiled that are not allowed to even enter their own country. And then to be paraded around as if Cuba is some vintage theme park for their socialism ideas. And the craziest thing is that she thinks that we don't care about our families in Cuba, when the reality is, if it wasn't for us sending things, sending money, sending regagas, sending food, medicine to our families in Cuba, that place would be sinking a long time ago. Spare me your fucking whitewash bullshit. Padre vida, si yo soy gusana.
Listen, I grew up in Miami. I know how Miami Cubans are because I grew up in Miami. I'm thinking beyond the election and how they voted. I have had close relationships with Cubans in the past because I grew up in Miami. I've listened to their explanations of how bad it was back in Cuba. These people, that Cold Pink lady, I doubt that she has sat down with an actual Cuban to talk about what is happening on the island. Hasan Piker, I doubt that he has sat down and had meaning conversations with Cubans. What's the Amani B girl who's all over social media talking about their trip to Cuba? I doubt that she has sat down and had any meaningful conversations with Cubans about the history of Cuba, the politics of Cuba, and how they got from A to B, period. But they are so proud of themselves. They are cheering themselves on.
Here we are on our way to Cuba!
It's all a performance. And that's why a lot of the Cubans are pissed off with this whole humanitarian trip. They see the gap between the performance and the reality. They see the people posting about aid while their own families are dealing with the blackouts, the empty grocery store shelves, and the constant shortages. And that frustration, it's understandable, because in a country this broken, optics matter, but accountability matters more. So the larger story here is not just Cuba's collapse. It's also the hypocrisy surrounding it, political pressure from the United States, a government struggling to keep the country functioning, and outside activists who sometimes appear more interested in staging a narrative than confronting the real suffering on the ground. What did they actually do for the people? Do they even know if the people got those supplies that they dropped off while staying in their luxury hotel with lights and air conditioning and water and food, while the people were in the dark, finding it hard to get the basics, the basic necessities? I've said it time and time and time again. Anybody can have a platform on social media. Anybody. But it's up to you to do your research, to make sure that you are following and listening to and giving your support to the right people. Thank y'all for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts on the story. Put it down below in the comment section, and I'll see y'all later.